reservations. Let's say this is one intake of reservations, right? There's 25 there. It could be anything up to 25,000 if I want it to be, right? What I can do with this is I can then right click and do a lot of bulk operations with this. So if I need to make a change to a whole series of reservations, say for example, for a whole course or even a whole intake, I could move them, for example, forward or back in time by hours or minutes. I could lift them all a couple of days if this is required. I can also adjust lengths and things like this. So I can do that to the live reservations. But what is potentially more useful to you is if I right click them, I have this drafts here. Now, if I click copy for a draft, what happens is it makes a duplicate of everything I have just highlighted and sends it into a draft. Otherwise, it takes the reservations I've just highlighted with modify and sends them into a draft. Let me show you the difference. Here I have some from 30th of August, for example, to the 22nd of November. So if I hit copy, go to a new draft, righto. I now have 25 reservations in this draft, and I have red everywhere. What the red indicates is that I have a clash. Now that makes sense because I just duplicated all of those reservations and put them on top of where they were. But what I can now do is right-click them and use my Move Reservations. And let's say I want to very easily copy either some or all of my schedule from a period to period. My first one starts in August the 30th, 2024. Let's go to 2025. The closest date would be this Friday, the 29th. If I hit Move Copies, I'm going to move these 364 days forward in time. And great, we now have the schedule for 2025, which we can go and see. I have a clash here because I also have rules in my system where my teachers must be available for this, and I haven't collected my availabilities yet. So I won't publish this yet because it won't be very good. But if I do have the availabilities, obviously, or I don't have that rule, then I won't have a problem. I can simply hit Perform Changes, and that publishes to the live database. However, if I don't hit Perform Changes, I have a draft list here. And I can go back to any other draft, or I can go to no draft, and nothing will have changed. Nothing's happened to my schedule until I go into my draft and hit Perform Changes to send that live. Now, noting, I used an example of 25 reservations. It is totally possible for you to simply select reservations for an entire year, maybe filter out ad hoc classes that you might not want to replicate, and just move the entire thing to another year. You might still want to do some work on that in terms of student groups, depending on how you handle student groups, or course occurrences, depending on how you handle those. But you have the ability to copy the bones of a schedule from period to period using this functionality. Before I move any further, do you have any other questions on this one so far?
Sorry, so there's one thing that I was concerned about. That it's like, let's say we have the same subject or same module, but it requires different grouping. How would you manage that one? Let's say, like, sometimes what we do here, what the system we have here is that, like, for example, for the lecture class, we have 100 students, but then for tutorial, we want to separate these 100 students into 3 groups because it's much easier for the lecturer to actually be there for each student to teach them whatever he taught during the lecture time. So how would you do it in this system? Like, so far, everything was good, but that was my concern, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. In this case, this is a very simple class where I simply have one lecture and a tutorial. If I leave this draft, I'll show you a different view that I have where I've created, again, this is leveraging some of our, or set up to leverage some of our automatic scheduling. But what I have here, with our data collection module, I have created a class structure, or imported, as you prefer, a class structure. And so I have here in the top line, a lecture, and here I have 4 sets of fieldwork exercises. Basically, this is an anthropology class. And if we look at the data, you can see that I have 4 what we call tracks, each with 15 students. I have the lecture here with 60. Now, the reason it has failed is because it's part of an experiment that I run as part of my demonstrations. When we look at auto scheduling next time, I'll show you why it fails. It's done on purpose. But the key thing for you to understand is that when we did data collection and created this data, the academic who was responding to that told me that they wanted 1 lecture. They have 60 students, right? So all the students can go to lecture. And because they have 60 students, and they said they want a maximum of 15 students per tutorial, the system automatically calculates, you need 4 tutorials, or in this case, fieldwork exercises, but you need 4 of the smaller class. You can use the system to automatically calculate that information. Similarly, if you do use our preferences module that I'm talking about here, one of the things you can also do, and is common, is a student system, or wherever you capture your enrollments is usually integrated. And so you have your enrollment figures coming in live. And at the time that you collect your delivery requirements from your academics or your faculty administrators or whoever it might be, they are able to see the live enrollment figure and therefore generate classes based on that, or request additional ones if they expect it to be higher. But they're able to make informed decisions with the live data rather than a guesswork or rolling it over from period to period without accounting for things like trend. So just noting, yes, we can handle that basic requirement that you mentioned there, but we can do much, much more if you have the data available.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
No worries. Great question. Were there any other ones?
Jordan, if I may ask, in this example that you illustrated, are you talking about a particular intake or a combination of intakes where you split the student into 4 groups? Is it a single cohort or is it multiple cohort? In our case, we have multiple cohorts doing the same module. And our students are divided by virtue of manually. Okay, let's say our tutorials are 40, right? Within the 40, there can be 2 different cohorts made up of the 40, right? So, but there could be a situation where it may overflow, it will be 43 or 44, but we want it to be broken up evenly.
Sure.
So how do you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. What you'll see here, if we look at this particular line, again, this is very new, so I understand if it's not immediately obvious, but here I have, say, a lecture. And this item here, this student set, right? This is one way that institutions in Australia will usually divide their students. We can call it a student group. We can call it whatever we like. But what this represents is a group of students, a cohort, like you've described. For this lecture, I have 4 different cohorts who are on this lecture. The system, whenever I schedule, if I click this magic button, we see it all come down here. The system is actively doing clash control for 4 different cohorts at any one time. So all of these objects have clash control. Each of these student sets have students who are what we call members of that set object. Wherever the set object is, the system considers that that student also is for the purposes of conflict control. And so the system can do conflict control as granular as to the individual student level, noting that in the case of, say, students from multiple intakes taking the same course, like you're describing, you may have students coming in and out of groups at different times, and the system can account for that. Whenever you schedule, you will have that clash control. And depending on how you do your registration, for example, as Trevor mentioned, we do have a self-serve registration module. We also have an allocation module. Depending on how and when you do that, the student's also able to have live clash control at the time they select their individual classes, potentially. So yes, we support the multiple intakes. In this example, it's actually a single intake, but it's the same concept with these student set groupings. They might come from totally different intakes. They might come from the same program. Because of the way that our data model is structured, it actually doesn't matter at all. You'll have clash control regardless.
All right, great, thanks.
You're very welcome once again. All right. Just thinking in the interest of time, gentlemen, we've got another hour and 10 minutes. I'd love to show you a little bit more in our core system, and then I can go across to our viewer system. Trevor, my thinking on this, I feel it might be advantageous for us to potentially spend 10 minutes on autopilot here. Yep.
Yeah, I think to give the concept, I think it'll be good.
Great.
But I think obviously we will need a more detailed session. But
Definitely.
showing them that we do have the capabilities and how it reacts functionality. I think it'll be good. Yeah, good idea.
Great. So gentlemen, please excuse me as far as this demonstration goes. In terms of getting the data into your system, we will need a more comprehensive session on that because we do have many options you have. Understanding you do it via Excel, I think we can significantly improve that process, but that requires a more detailed demonstration. Where I'll start in this is we have the data. Yeah. And because of the way that our system is structured, it's very easy to get it in. So the data is in and ready to schedule. And so what we'll do is we'll do some scheduling, and I might also show you a trick with the draft mode for scenario planning. So you can choose which ones you want to send live. So let's start. The interface we see here is our activity manager. So this is where anything that has come from our data collection or has been imported is ready to schedule, is waiting, right? And so this is where it waits for it to be put into the schedule. Now, I have partially scheduled this, as I mentioned. Now, it's very easy for me to unschedule this in bulk or schedule additional things. I'm just going to clear this out of my schedule. And the reason I'm going to do that is I'm going to show you how we can leverage our auto schedule here. Now, if I click at the top, I'm highlighting everything in this batch of data that I've collected to schedule, right? All of these, what we call unscheduled activities. If I then hit my magic schedule button here, I need to do a couple of things. I need to give each job a name. If I don't give it one, it'll create one for me, but let's give it a name. Let's call it job 1 for APU. Now, if I click constraint profile, what this does is it gives me different options of rule sets that I've created where I tell the system I want output of a certain type. I want you to treat my data and the constraints in different ways between these rule sets, and I'm picking the one I want. Now, I will pick this one here, and then I'll show you what's in the rule set, okay? So let's say I pick layer 3. Then I have this slider. If I take it all the way to fast, the first available spot it finds, it will drop that and move on. If I go all the way to optimized, it will take its time, pulling things in and out of the schedule to make sure that the thing that it eventually gives us is as optimized as possible. Anywhere in between is along that spectrum. So I'm simply going to hit the job and let it run. While it runs quickly, what that constraint profile looks like is this. So different types of data might be in my input. For example, date ranges. This class must happen in that week, for example. A weekday, I might collect certain weekdays that I want either it must be scheduled on or I would prefer that day, times, and these sorts of things. The date ranges here I have set to hard. And so what this says is that this class must happen in that week. If it cannot be scheduled in that week, give me a fail for that activity and move on. And that's why you saw some fails before because of the rules that I've set. Here I have soft on these two. This is saying if there's a day and a time in my data, it's not a hard constraint. It's a preference. I want you to try and do this, but you don't have to if you can't, yeah? And I also have this slider, and this is a penalty. So I say to the system, I want you to try this hard out of 10 to make that happen, 10 being basically a hard constraint, yeah? I also have some other rules. So things like the sequence order, if it must be a lecture and then a tutorial, for example, I can make that a soft constraint. And I have some other things that I think may be useful to you. So this here is a deviation. The way this works is if you have a series of classes, let's say you have 10 classes and you've got a room, right? In time edit, you can capture things like if a room is under maintenance for maybe week 6 and 7, what time edit can do is allow deviation. And what that does is the system will say, well, the normal room 1, 2, 3 that we're in for this class can't be used in week 6 and 7. So I'm going to move this out of that room. And here I have a little field that it says you can move it but you must keep these things the same. And so I have here building. Maybe I add in something like equipment. So it might be you can take it out of Chem Lab 1, 2, 3, but it must go in another Chem Lab in the same building with the same equipment, for example. And what that means then is you don't have to search for any of this. You don't have to intervene and you don't have to fix it later. The system does it for you. Yeah. As we go back into our activities, we're going to see some interesting things in our output. If we click any one of these buttons, what this does is it says, show me the clashes and show me the schedule for this thing. So I've scheduled it and I can see these beautiful yellow boxes are this Anthropology 304 class. But I can also see that I have some fails. And I see that I get very comprehensive information as to why it couldn't be scheduled according to my rules. It says here I couldn't find something that matches the filter criteria I set. What I did, I wanted it in a classroom and I wanted 60 seats. Now, if I look at my rooms here, I don't have a classroom that has 60 seats. My biggest classroom can take 58. But I also have a special rule. If we look at my classroom here, this one here, see I have a normal seating capacity, an exam seating capacity, tutorial, event, and so on. I also have here overbooking capacity. So I can have multiple capacities for the same room based on how I want to use it, what the context is. And what I can do is I can say to the system, in this case, use that capacity. In that case, use the other one, for example. And so here, because I can't normally fit this lecture into a classroom, but I've got one here that can take 62 if I really need to. What I can instead then do is I can use my filters here. I've got a comprehensive set of filters that automatically come up based on what's in your data. So if you have a data point in your data, you can filter on it. But I can click here, for example, on status, select just the failed ones to narrow down the ones I want to now reschedule, which are my lectures that couldn't quite fit. And I can apply a different set of rules. Let's call this job 2. I've got one here that has allow overbooking. And the way this works is I have one more piece I didn't show you called field constraints. And this says, in the event that maybe your original capacity couldn't be met, if the activity size is less than or equal to the overbooking capacity, you can use that instead. And so that's what it's done. And when we head back in here, we can see that I've got nothing showing because they've all scheduled. And I've got my lectures now have fit into that room that could take 62, as we can see. So again, the system can anticipate what you as a human would do in the situation where you have some challenges scheduling, when you have rich enough data to make those decisions and see what's happening, and it can then fix those problems for you. Now, the last little piece, oh, sorry, was there a question there? No, beautiful. There's only one last piece on this that I'll quickly show you. I mentioned scenario planning. So the draft mode that I showed you before is great for being able to test outputs, basically. If we click this jobs button, I can see all the jobs that I've done, and you can see that I do lots of auto scheduling. And if I look at, say, this one here that I've run, I get an ID here that I can use. And this ID, like anything else in Time Edit, can be used to filter for certain things. And this reservation list has a really cool filter language that lets me hunt down lots of different things. As we see here, I can take a whole section of my schedule, pop it into this list, and then put it in a draft. So let's do that. Let's pop this in a draft. So this is our auto scheduling draft 1, right? This then, we see lots of gray happening here. These are all the other reservations in my database that are not in this draft. As they get changed, or as someone else schedules into the database, I see availability updating live for everything else that's not in my draft. So I can't, for example, have an outdated draft that I accidentally create a bunch of clashes. It doesn't work like that. But what I can then do is make sure that I'm keeping my draft output here as optimized as I like. I can then head out of the draft and back into my auto scheduler here, remove everything from the real schedule that I've created just now and run another job, so I don't lose what I just put in my draft, I can run another job, for example. You can see how quickly it's and easily it's done, right? To just run a couple jobs. So we know we're going to have some reservations in there for us. We can head on over to our job output again. See, it's in progress for us now. We can take our ID for that, and we can try again. We might have a little bit of thinking time happening here. Once it's ready to go, we can try again. Alrighty. I've given it some additional constraints this time. It's just taking a moment. But when it does get done, we can pop it into a draft and have repeated ones. As we can see, that's all good now. So, great. And this is our list. And again, we can take those, pop them in another draft, and call this one maybe our draft 2. And that lets us compare the two very simply. We can flick between drafts to see the difference in output very easily. And so if we wanted to, for example, we had a strategically important course that we were running or something that was critical that we wanted to visualize. This is an individual week, but you might do it over multiple weeks. And you can then just quickly click between the multiple weeks there, or multiple drafts here, sorry, to see the different outputs and find the one that looks best to you based on things like how spread out it is, whether it hits the constraints that you like, and so on. So you have much more granular control with this particular functionality. All right, I think we've seen quite a lot out of this one. In terms of auto scheduling and the input side, that's definitely something that we can discuss a little later in a follow-up demo, as Trevor was implying. I'd like to move across to another piece now, which is our viewer module, where it automatically publishes to whenever you schedule anything that's past a certain status. But before I do that, I just want to check, did you have any further questions on things like the draft mode or anything else that I've shown so far before I jump into viewer?
I've got a question about the autopilot. You had a slider earlier where you choose between fast and optimize. So I'm a bit curious. Let's say we are scheduling about 2,000. Earlier, Arsalan said the average about 2,700 classes a week. What's the longest it takes? Like if it's fully optimized, like if the slider is all the way to the right.
Yeah, longest I've ever seen is about 12 minutes. And that was upwards of, multiple thousands of courses. Multiple thousands of activities. So that was about 12 minutes. But generally speaking, you're probably not going to do jobs much bigger than that. We work with some institutions who have like very large data sets. So Robert Jan will be very familiar with KU Leuven with 120,000 students. So they obviously have a large data set. And in Australia here, we have the University of Melbourne, who have a huge amount of variation in their courses and a lot of choice. And so also schedule an incredibly complicated schedule, and they do that with autopilot. But what they tend to do is batch them or layer them. So I imagine you probably do something similar with Unitime. Would that be right? Like basically running them in layers?
Yes, I mean,
Yeah.
in terms of layers, by batching, do you mean the intakes or like, I didn't quite get your question actually.
Yeah. So when we refer to layering, generally what institutions will do with layering is that they won't batch them by intake, but might batch them by the complexity of the scheduling job at hand. So for example, the lectures that use the big lecture theaters, they might do those first, and then they'll work down layers until they get to the tutorials that can kind of go anywhere. And that's one example of how you might use layering. And therefore, what they can do is use things like tags here and use the tags to filter into jobs that they run one at a time. They run that first job, and that might have 2,000 lectures, make sure that that looks good, and then they'll run maybe a batch of tutorials for a certain set of cohorts, for example, make sure they're happy with that, and continue down that sequence. Does that sound similar to what your current process is?
So this big classes already have the correct place.
Yeah.
First, then the lower priority, then they can put.
Yeah, but I think anytime we don't have that kind of layering, isn't it? It is the duration we run the solver, right? To optimize the output.
Yes, I mean, there are some settings to it. I mean, we can, but usually what Unitime does, basically, it goes from the Monday to Friday. But definitely because our university is a bit flexible in terms of different perspectives. So technically, some weeks you might see that Wednesdays are the heavy load on it. We have more students compared to other days. But what in an optimal situation that Unitime does is that it goes from Monday to Friday. But definitely the preferences, the constraints that you set affecting this allocation system. I mean, we can force it, but we usually don't do that. We prefer that the engine itself makes the best algorithm out of whatever input that we set for it.
Right.
For example, if I want to give case for this way, maybe we have 4 hours classes. So normally it is very hard to allocate, especially in big number of students. So we can put layer 1, that's long duration classes, because this is very hard to allocate.
Yes, exactly.
So start by 4 hours, then 3 hours, then 2 hours, then 1 hour. Then this is how we can make the best from the engine, how it's optimized the work. So we call the longest is the highest layer. So the engine automatically give them the highest priority first. Then this is the first batch. Then automatically the layer 2 is 3 hours or 2 hours, second batch. So it's more optimized way. Then how it's make the engine actually easy working for you, not like suddenly unallocated room for 4 hours. It's very hard for the engine after finish all the optimize, then you see suddenly 4 hours is not don't have room. So if you want to fit room for this, it's very difficult. You have to move 3 classes, and so maybe this is the use case can be.
Yes, that's exactly right. What you would usually have in your first layers is the most heavily constrained classes, and it sounds like those long duration classes, potentially with multiple cohorts, you need to get more people together. If you have to move one, that's a nightmare. So it's getting that in first. So yes, that's the concept of layering. Just knowing that you can do that in autopilot, you can sort and tag and filter in a really easy way, and then queue a bunch of jobs. And so each job might only take a couple of minutes potentially if they're quite large, or as you've seen before, between sort of 5 and 20 seconds if they're more of a sort of 40 to 200-ish batch, which is a bit more common. And usually it's quite a quick process then to get everything scheduled once you have your data in. All right. Right.
The duration and the biggest number is like 500 students with 4 hours. This one should be number 1.
Right.
Just to add on, perhaps, when you say layering, right? In our context, probably you understand that prioritizing, what to schedule. But you see, in our situation, we have a common request from the head school of heads or the academic leaders to have the lecture first, followed by tutorial.
Sure.
But what Unitime does, it's unable to distinguish or differentiate that. So it just jumbles up everything and churn out the output. But we do request that lectures need to be first, followed by tutorials. So can that also be customized?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll show you 2 things here to solve both of the things you just discussed. Firstly, I have a duration element on everything here. So I can sort by duration. So what Mustafa was talking about there, I can sort my activities by the longest duration and then tag them or simply run them in that order, right? So very easy for me to do the longest things first, if that's how you want to do your prioritization. With regard to the lecture and then the tutorial and making sure they don't get jumbled. So if I look here, I have one of my constraint options, match sequence order. So when you get data submitted, naturally, whether you import it or whether you use our preferences module, you have to have an order for the classes that are being scheduled. It has to be in some order. Now, in preferences, our system, it's very easy for you to simply say which order you want them to be in. So I might have my lecture, and then I have my tutorial. If I have, for example, 1 lecture and 4 tutorials, fine. It means the lecture has to happen, and then the tutorials can happen. Now, if I have multiple classes, I might have more of a sequence. It might be lecture, tutorial, workshop, lab. It doesn't really matter. You can set a sequence, and then we can ensure if we use hard here, the system must schedule them in that order. So not only will it not jumble it, but it will use that as a central constraint in the scheduling.
Right. Great. That's great. But will there by any chance disadvantage optimization of the resources?
I'm
In
sorry, I
terms
missed
of
the first half
classroom,
there.
What I'm asking is, will there disadvantage the optimization of the resources, such as classrooms, lecture rooms? Will it disadvantage? If all lectures are first, followed by tutorials or lab on another day, how will you balance the resource utilization?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really depends on the input data. I think that's a big part of it as to which resources are being used for example, lectures. You probably want to, or we would probably want to understand more about which resources are being allocated to those higher priority classes because they will be scheduled first. But one thing that we do have that we're building, again, this was not in the original scope, but it's something that we are building, is something called demand analytics, which is being part of our reporting suite that we offer. And what demand analytics does, when you use our preferences module and collect all of your data, you may not have scheduled the classes, but you know, for example, the weeks that that lecture and tutorial are going to fall in. You just don't know the times yet. And you know the rooms they want. You know what they've asked for, right? Or if you've rolled it from a previous period, you know what you asked for last year. When you have that data, you can then analyze. So here we have an example of for example, for this collection period, I have all the rooms that are in my data, and I can create filters and categories so that I can analyze them in groups, right? So I have my lecture halls, I have my classrooms and computer labs. I have 2 campuses at Time Out University, one in Melbourne and one in Gothenburg. And then I have maybe big lecture halls, little lecture halls, or halls with specific equipment, right? So I create the categories. From there, I can look at the demand for that type of resource across the period. And I can see here, for example, in week 2, we're at about 50% demand, but in week 5, it's above my warning level, which is 80%. I might struggle to facilitate everyone wanting this in that week. And so this gives you the ability to visualize before you start scheduling, can I actually meet what people have asked me for? Or am I underutilizing it and can I utilize it better? And you can then intervene and you can change that data if you like. So this activity manager interface actually lets you change data as a scheduler if you're allowed to. Again, your scheduling team in the room today most likely would have that ability. And you can change that data, or you can send it back through the approval workflow to the person who submitted it with some information about what they need to change. So if they've requested, say, a lecture hall, but they only have 40 students, and you're going to struggle to meet all of your lectures in that week, you can send that back to them for resubmission and say, hey, we don't have lecture halls in that week. We're running low. Can you teach in a classroom instead? So you have many options to handle that, but it starts with the visibility of your data. It starts with understanding what's actually happening, and we give you this. So this is something that we are building. This is not yet released, but it's something we're building into our reporting suite and aim to have by the end of the year as something that should be released.
Okay, thanks.
You're very welcome. Okay, any further questions so far? Loving the questions. These are great, by the way.
Okay. Let me try and describe a scenario where we published classes like in the beginning of the semester, and now due to probably, I guess, like the estimated number was higher than the actual enrollment. And after registration, so typically in our university, we keep the registration open until the third week of the semester.
Yep.
So the registration has now closed, and it turns out that we have actually scheduled too many lectures and too many tutorials. So now the academic team has come back to us and said, we don't need so many lectures and tutorials. Can we merge these and so that make them fewer? Okay, but we've also got the added constraint where, because initially they thought that they needed to assign 3 staff members to teach 3 different lecturers and with corresponding tutorials. Because another request that we often get from schools is the same lecturer needs to teach the same students for their tutorials as well.
Yeah.
So now we've got a situation where the request is to merge 3 lectures each one. And maybe we would have initially had 9 tutorials, 3 each. And so now that's being merged into 3. Would the system be able to manage it? Like, how would you do it?
Yeah. Do we want to see that whole scenario play out from start to finish? Let's do it. Let's play it out. So this is going to be live. I don't know if my data will work for this or if I'm going to have a mess, but you'll see every step, okay? So this is a good segue into Viewer, where we can see schedules. Now, what we have with Viewer is you have the ability for change requests. So let's say this might be a faculty administrator. It could be a staff member who is identifying to you that they have an under enrollment. I have 3 classes with 3 different staff members. I don't need 3. I need 1 class, and I need to merge these classes together. Yeah. So let's do that. Here I see an example of Viewer. So this is the schedule publishing system. So this is right now being, for example, published to someone who is a faculty administrator, for example. I see everything happening for anthropology, right? And what I'm going to do, I'm going to find the program that I just scheduled. Just scheduled in some reservations. Great, cool. So we see these little red dots. These are the ones I just scheduled in my autopilot job. Now let's say in these particular ones, I have a 15 student is what I'm expecting, right? But as a staff member, I've been notified somehow, or I've discovered, again, my data's not quite set up to have the full flow of exactly how we found this out, but we've been notified that the student enrollments have dropped. We don't need quite so many classes. We only need 1. So what we can do, we can edit reservations either individually or in bulk. As a staff member, I can, for example, select these 3 and say, right, this Wednesday and the 2 Friday fieldwork exercises, these practicals, I'm going to merge them all into 1. So as you see here, I have 3 selected, right? If you want to, you can give staff members the permission, and you can have different kinds of staff member have different permissions, yeah, to edit certain things directly on the reservation. Now, I'm a super user, so I have times and that sort of stuff and programs, but one common one, if you do let them edit anything, is usually the activity type. You might let them edit from, say, a practical to a workshop, or they might change a teacher, but only within other teachers who are qualified to teach. And again, they can't create a clash doing this because everything sits on a live database, yeah? But what we're going to do here is our change request flow. Okay, so again, you as schedulers might receive something like this. We see a type of change request. I don't have a category here, but let's just call it, say, for example, time related. We have a comment, right, in this change request. And let's put a comment in here. So this might be what the staff member does. We have only 15 students actually enrolled for ANTH 304. Please merge these 3 classes, right? Great. Then they hit done. From the perspective of the staff member, I've just had 3 reservations updated where I have put a comment on there telling me I need to merge these 3 classes. right? So their job is done. Now, let's now be a scheduler, right? So take off the staff member hat. Now we're a scheduler. In my interface, I have a setup that I've got here with a reservation list where I have all of the reservations that have had changes made to them that I want to see. And so this is a place where I can go to see any change requests that have come through like I just did and action them. Now I've got lots of information here, but what I might want to see, I'll just edit my, again, see how easy it is to edit my interface. Let's put in my change request. Let's put in some information here. What have we got? We've got lots of information. Do we have request change? This might be the one we want. Nope, not quite. We can see here we have our practicals though. And if we click our information, I can see exactly what was written. I can see that I only have 15 students enrolled. Please merge these 3 classes. And again, if I have a little play here, got a general comment field that might make it easier to see, but I don't know where I've put it. That's all right. Lots, as you can see how many options I have at the very least. If I open this up, I can see that these are my 3 practicals. So for today's example, this one, and this one. Great. All right. If I'm going to merge them, the simplest thing would be to see on this one, I have group 3. This is a set of students, right? I have group 3 set of students. On this one, I have group 4. On this one, I have group 2. The simplest thing for me to do would be to cancel this one. I'm going to ungroup them, so I just cancel 1, pop that off the calendar, do the same again here. So I've canceled those 2. And then I can click this Wednesday one. This is the one I'm going to keep. Change the object on this one. Click on my students. Now, I can see something down here when I click my student sets. The system is showing me the student groups who are enrolled in this course. That should be able to be added to this if they are free, and I'm only seeing the ones that are free. If I untick free, well, luckily all of them are free because I just got rid of the other ones. And if I click these, see I now have 3 student cohorts on this class, and I hit save. If I now look at this class, I have 3 student cohorts, group 1, 2, and 3, all in this class on the Wednesday morning. So I've merged those classes. The others are gone. Now, in terms of the staff member, right, we want to do 2 things. We want to notify the staff member and we want to notify the students. So let's do both. In this field here where we have our comment, let's go back to Nancy, our staff member. Hey, Nancy, this has been done. And we hit save. Noting, I selected a type of change request. You might have more or just as much in terms of the data you collect during change requests so that you can report on the types of change requests later. So one common thing that institutions do is they collect all the data on all the changes that were made or requested. They maybe do some reporting on how many they actually handled versus how many were requested, or who was asking for the most changes and therefore causing the most disruption to the timetable. So just noting, you can have lots of visibility on that, right? But we've popped that comment in. If we go back into viewer now, see my calendar's just completely changed. Now the reason it's completely changed is if I head back in here, which date were we on? Great, cool. So this week I have 1 on the Wednesday the 28th, and I see my comment here because this is a live native integration. It's the same database, just pops up here because it's the same data. There's no delay. We don't have the Friday classes anymore in this week, but if we go to the next week, I still have Wednesday, Friday, because I only made the change for 1 week, right? I could do it for the whole subject if I wanted to, but I did it just for the 1 week, just so you can see the difference, right? So that's how this works and how quickly that change actually goes through. Is that what you were looking to see from that process? Does that satisfy what you wanted?
Yes, but okay, so follow-up question. So earlier, after you had deleted the 2 Friday classes and you wanted to put the students into the Wednesday class, like you mentioned that okay, it's a good thing they were free. What would be the case if one of the groups is not free? What would you do?
If one of the groups is not free, great question. Let's let's do that, and then I'll do something else I forgot for you. So one other thing I forgot to do, just quickly, is to show you how to notify staff and students. If I right-click any reservation I do, so let's pretend I've just made that change. I click send by email. The email address of anyone that's on that reservation will automatically pop up here, and I can send a notification that the reservation's changed and that they're on this reservation. So Nancy, plus if I have students, all of her students will have their emails here and they'll receive a notification. They also see it in their time edit calendar instantly. So just making that note. Let's talk about what happens if one of the groups is not free. So let's take, for example, I'm just going to make some quick changes. Let's take off group 4, right? And now let's create another class for group 4, yeah, in a different place with a different teacher. Let's use Michael in this room, and let's make it a different class. Let's do it for say it's an ad hoc class or something, catch-up session, whatever it is. Now, you see that I still have hard boxes here. The reason I have hard boxes is because in the rule set I'm using, I cannot create a clash anywhere in that student's enrollment program. So I've actually set it up so that if a student is enrolled in, say, the anthropology program, the subjects that are in that program can't clash with each other. So I have to manually do this, but if I do this and say I have a catch-up session on Wednesday, say it's at these times, right? Now, let's go back to our example where we merge some classes. Right, let's merge some classes. So here I have group 2 and group 3. If I want to change this reservation to include group 4, I can see here MEA group 4 disappears when free is selected. So in order to put them on there, I need to untick free, so I know that they are going to create a clash. I need to select them, and it needs to be a manual thing. I need to manually select them, and I need to allow a double reservation, as you can see, for that to go through. Otherwise, I can't put them there because it would create a clash. As you can see, group 4 is already booked. Now, if I just change a setting here so it's a little more obvious, great. See how I can see that group 4 is on this reservation? Yeah, simple enough for me to go, what is this? Oh, it's a catch-up session. I could, as a scheduler, if I wanted to be mean, just cancel it, or I can move it. Let's say their catch-up session can be later. Their catch-up session can be at 2 p.m., right? And I'm going to send everyone an email to make sure they get the notification that I've moved their session. And then I can go back in here and say, right, now I've moved them, and now I see that they are free. And I can add them in without having to do anything else and hit save. That's one way you can handle that.
Okay. Another follow-up question. Okay, so earlier we were talking about under-enrollment and we had merged classes. Yeah. What if it's over-enrolled and now we need to add more classes?
Great, easy process. Same thing. Now I will say, I'm showing you this in Viewer today. Trevor did mention we have allocate and registration as our student self-serve and student allocation products that we've just released. That product, again, will require probably more time for a full demonstration of that. But in that product, we have a specific workflow for this, where people can see the classes that they have, and if they need to add or remove classes, they can request that, and there's a specific workflow for that in there. So I will note, you may see another way of doing this later, and this might be your preferred way, or the one you see later may be your preferred way. Just making note of that. But again, in Viewer, let's say now Nancy gets more late enrollments. So again, now I'm going to pretend to be Nancy, and I'm going to edit and create another request change, right? So I've just had 20 students enroll late, or maybe 15. Let's say 15 more students enroll late, just so it's one more class. Please give me another class. Could you do Thursday? Right, so let's make it nice and complicated. And we'll request a change. Yeah, so hit done. Great. Again, Nancy's job is done in a moment, right? For you as a staff member, put your staff member hat back on now. What have we here? So jump back into our interface here, and we're going to look at our changes. And again, we see that Nancy's change request, we know it's this one. And again, if we open up the information, we see I've just had 15 more students enroll late. Please give me another class. Could you do Thursday? Now, this one's really easy. The reason it's really easy, if I click on a class, I'm telling the system, show me all the classes for this thing, right? Now, it automatically puts all those objects in the selection list and shows me the clashes. So if I want to do it on Thursday, I can see Thursday and I can see all this time I have. I need a 2-hour class. Great, I got 2 hours here at 2 o'clock, so let's do that. Now, the only thing I need to change, actually that's a 3-hour class, isn't it? My maths is terrible, sorry team. Let's make it 3 hours. The only thing I need to change in the real world, let's make it very realistic, is I have the same student groups. Yeah, so I might need to take those students, maybe take off group 2, I'll put group 3 and 4 in this one. And in this one, I'll put group 2. Put my room back on there. Wherever I was. Great, that's what I want. Put my room back on there. And then generally you'll have had one automatically created if you've got more students, but let's just create a student group for argument's sake. Call group 5. And we'll use it here. We need our student set, and let's call it group 5, right? So now we have the 2 student groups who are being used here, or even actually group 1 will do just fine because we already pulled them off the other one. So now groups 1 and 2 are on this one, 3 and 4 are on that one. Yeah. Now you generally won't have to go through the student set thing because you might have, again, self-registration. If you don't, you'll just allocate the students across the courses. It's not something you'll usually need to handle, but I want to make sure you see the whole process here. Now, the last piece, again, is going back to Nancy. You've got your wish is my command. And we hit save. And again, we might trigger a notification to Nancy to say, Nancy, you've now got a Thursday class. And again, if we go into the calendar here, Nancy's Thursday class. Yeah?
Hey, Jordan.
Yes.
I just saw here how because now the group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, we split group 3 and 4 to Thursday. So how the system now this group 2 group is not conflict with other classes? Because the group can be from different intake or different cohorts. So how avoid the classes between other?
That's a great question. That is a great question. So the way the system understands that, if I look at this group 4, right, and I'll click this modify button, up here I have this box that says members. Now I believe this will be empty in my database. Yep, okay. See how I have student here? What we do is your student information, we can bring in individual students, and based on what they've enrolled in, those groups that we see, the student groups, they represent the actual students that have enrolled, and students become members of these groups. And so what happens is the student set that's on the calendar actually shows conflict control for each individual student in that group, right? And so whenever I select it, if there is a clash, it will show in the calendar, and I cannot create a clash, and it will say can't create a clash because of student X, for example. Or it usually will be about the enrollment pathway that you use. That's usually how this is managed. But again, something we can discuss during implementation as to how you want to structure that conflict model. And we can advise you as best practice, if you're interested, as to how you can handle some of that student clash control. But noting, if there is a clash for students, you will see it in that interface.
How about we don't sync the students Because now we are not syncing the student, only.
Yep.
by program.
Yeah,
It's per
totally
program.
fine. It just means you have less. It means that your conflict control is a little less strong without the students, but it's not a problem. What you might have are 3 options, for example, and you plan your schedule to make sure that there is at least one option always available for any student in that particular course or group of courses. So we have a tool that actually does that for you called Data Manager. So you create what we call study combinations, right? It might be, say, unit 1, 2, and 3, right? Those 3 things can't clash. A cohort's going to take all of those things, for example, and we don't want any of those classes to clash between them. Yeah, the student needs at least one valid pathway through it. And so the system will automatically generate all these student groups and create them for you. You don't have to actually have students in them, but what that means then is when students either register directly to classes or they are allocated into the classes eventually, there is at least one valid place for them to be, at least one clash-free option, no matter what they're enrolled in. And the system will do that calculation with our study combinations feature. Again, the challenge with that is you do need a lot of data. So you do need enrollment data. You need probably last year's at least historical enrollment data, and you need current enrollment data for the system to know how many groups do I need to generate. And you also need to know which classes you want to keep clash-free so that the system can say, these are the groups I need to generate, and here is how they need to be spread to give every student at least one clash-free option to enroll. That gets quite complex. Alrighty, team. Any further questions before we maybe
Okay. Have you ever come across a situation where your engine, your autopilot, because you're talking about doing timetable even to the level of the individual student. And have you ever come across any situation where you just couldn't schedule something because there was no available time where all the relevant stakeholders could,
Yeah, absolutely. It does happen.
It
And it does happen. So the important thing to note with time edit is when we build your conflict control model, what it will do, usually in the first year or two, we find that institutions start to understand where there are gaps or where there are potentially sources of data that are not high quality. And potentially that is, and quite often in the first year, that is in the data collection phase where there might be someone requesting something that simply cannot be done alongside everything else. Those combination of activities just will not fit. And that does happen. Why we do 2 things with that. Firstly, we make it very visible in the interface or in the auto scheduling. You saw when I auto scheduled, I had some failures because I had something that just couldn't be done. I manufactured that myself, but rarely that does happen. When that happens, again, this is probably worth a proper full demo on preferences. You can send that back down the chain with tracking on this, that to that individual who has requested something that can't happen, and that might be multiple people, that they need to change their request to be able to be scheduled. Because no matter what, sometimes there are situations you simply cannot schedule something. What I will say is if you're not finding that happening now, if you're not finding that you have a clash now that you just couldn't resolve or you had to move some things around, then you won't see it in time edit. If you do see it in time edit, it's because someone has worked this out manually in the past, usually involving moving some classes to make something possible or canceling some classes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, sorry, one more question that I have is that, let's say, is there any possibility that when we run the jobs, we schedule them, some classes become unassigned cases? Is it possible, or it's always notify the user that like there's a clash, this class cannot be allocated due to like these reasons?
There is
So
no such thing as an unassigned case. You cannot just have one sit there that nothing happened to. If you've used, for example, the auto scheduler and you said, I want to schedule this thing, it will either schedule it, or it will tell you I could not schedule it because of this reason, and it will give you the comprehensive information. Or it will tell you I could schedule it, but you asked for something and I couldn't do that, but I still scheduled it. So I'll quickly show you. In this interface here, where we were doing our jobs before, I did that first one that had some failures. If I use this jobs menu, I've got some insights, and you can see what this looks like. So exactly the example, 32 of my 40 scheduled, 8 of them failed, and we know that's because I couldn't find a room that matched the criteria I asked for, which is a classroom with 60 seats, yeah? So it tells me you couldn't do this because you couldn't find the filter criteria. But for the ones that did schedule, I had some soft constraints, some preferences that I couldn't meet, and quite a lot of them. And the reason was because my data was terrible. My data's terrible because my academic asked me to put 4 different fieldwork exercises that take 2 hours each, all on Thursday at 3 p.m. in the same place. Now that can't be done with the same teacher. Can't be done. But what can be done is that the system then spreads them across the week. Yeah. So we saw before in our example, we had 1 on Wednesday, 2 on Friday, and we've got another one here on Monday. That's our 4 groups that was originally scheduled. Yeah. So we could fit 1 on Thursday, but the other 3 had to be spread out because otherwise it wouldn't have scheduled. And we told the system that was okay. So you have not just visibility on when it did schedule or didn't schedule, but if it did, how high quality was it? You will never have an unassigned reservation like this. It doesn't happen unless you didn't put it in the scheduling.
So technically it gives you suggestions like what you could have done in order to have this class allocated, right?
Yeah, it will tell you if you couldn't schedule it, why you couldn't schedule it. So again, here, I could not schedule this because I couldn't find what I needed. It's telling you I couldn't find what you asked for. I couldn't find a classroom that was big enough. Couldn't do it because you don't have one. So you will need to make one or change your requirements. And so I could change this. You see here, I have manually edit filters. So as a scheduler, you could intervene here and say, well, a classroom for 60 people, now you really need a lecture theatre, and change this to a lecture theatre, and it will schedule in a lecture theatre instead. Or I could go back to that person and say, do you really have 60 students? Because if I look at ANTH 304, for example, in my database, with my live availability, I see I have 100 planned students. I might have actual number of enrollments 40. Let's pretend that was already 40. And so I might see live from the student system, I don't really have 60 students, and I don't think they're going to need that lecture theatre. So I'm going to change that number in the activity size, and it will give me that classroom. So you have lots of different options. You do get the visibility as to why it could or couldn't schedule, and then you can make a decision as to what you want to do from there.
Okay, Jordan, maybe can the engine suggest for me, for example, like this room, this class got 60 students. So originally, when I run the engine like last month, it was no class got 60 students in. So one of the classes is 40 students. It's taking one of the room got 60 can occupy 60 students.
Yeah.
When this class come to this week, so I see 60 students, but cannot fit because there is no room to fit 60. And there is another room that already taken since last month, and they continue this class. They already 40, and they don't need 60 like capacity, 60 student room capacity. So how, like, can the engine suggest for me there is room now got 40 students taking over, and you need this 60 student room capacity. So how can the engine suggest for me you can swap between these two classes So now unallocated class with 60 cannot fit. So I will find for you a room with 40 students. You move it somewhere else and you fit this student who cannot fit.
Yes, what you're asking for is the holy grail functionality. It will do it except that last step, which is to actually do it without you asking. So if I, for example, click this button, right? This is essentially the manual schedule button, yeah, for this particular class. And I'm saying to the system, righto, well, I want to schedule a class here with everything that's here. If you can't schedule automatically, let me try. Yeah. Now just all right, great. So I want to schedule a class here. Now what the system's saying is, well, based on what you've got there, these are your options. Okay. Now it's got this little yellow icon here. This is a filter icon. So it's saying based on what your input data says, it needs to be a classroom on the main campus. And it needs to be big enough, right? Big enough for the 60 students. Now, I can do a number of things here. I can start removing some of these filters and see what I see. And if I take out classroom, well, I can see an easy fix. I've got a free room here that's got 150 seats. I've got other rooms here that are close to it. I can do a number of things. If I want to, one of the things that I've seen some institutions do is very quickly for them. So I'll show you how easy it is to configure this. If I've got a room that looks like it's right, say, pick one here, this one, BH 207, 60, right? I can go into my calendar here and I can modify this really easily. So what I can do, I can change the headers to be even just an object, right? And I can bring things into it. So everything in BH 207, show me everything in BH 207, and then BH maybe 10, what was one of the one we used, 104, right? So this is the regular room that we can't fit into. This is a room that we might have some things in. Let's pretend there's some classes in here that we need to swap. What this does then is it visualizes it for me. If I want to swap them, well, I can just click and drag, swap that reservation to a different room, and then bring the other one back in to this room if I want to. So it's very easy for me to do that in an interface here and say, cool. Another thing that we can do, if enrollment numbers change, which I think was part of your question, if you had like 40 for a period and then a 60, you can select a whole series of classes in your reservation list where we were doing bulk things before, like this, and say, okay, I want you to do automatic object selection. So I want the system to reassess what object of a certain type is on this. Do your numbers again, basically. And so if I click it, I see the different sorts of objects I have, and let's pick rooms, right? And now I'm saying to the system, I want you to reassess which rooms you need for this classroom, and I want you to use a different set. Maybe I take those filters off. And so I originally had, say, classroom on the main campus, right? This is what it was before. I don't have anything that's going to work. So now I want you to extend that. It might be classrooms and lecture theaters. And if I had maybe some case study rooms involved as well, for example, any of those that fit the size, let's open it up and then pick me a new room. And if I use automatic object selection, it's going to pick 13 new rooms for that class. Yeah, and automatically. So you've got a number of different ways you want to do that. The only thing it won't do is just automatically change rooms on you without asking. You will need to initiate the change, whether it's here with the automatic selection or whether it's individually. Cool, I see that there's some underutilization. Let's move the rooms around.
Okay, so I will also ask you the other two questions. There is a scenario that now currently we see some rooms when we walk in, there is no student. So after we check, we figure out this room actually got class now, but the lecturer decided to move the class during that week to online. Because it's not required to be physically. This is number one case. Number two case, actually there is class happening, but this module, its first 3 weeks it has lecture, then fourth and fifth week is tutorial. But you want to make it like in that fourth and fifth week on the tutorial, then back after week 6, 7, 8 at the end, back to lecture. But
Okay.
when we do the scheduling, it's taking the semester as it is from the week 1 until the end. So it's not gathering these 2 weeks. So
Got it,
when we
got it.
walk in, we see the room empty also, like for that 2
Mhm.
weeks. So this under totalizes the room also.
Got it, got it.
We talked with the lecturer, he said, oh, this week only or next week. So after that, we come back to the room.
Sure,
So,
sure.
So this is another.
The first one, yes, I will give you the answer in a moment. In the second example, does the lecturer know that they want to do this before the start of the semester, or do they decide this during the semester?
It's mixed cases. Some of them they know like third week, fourth week, I have tutorial, but some of them they decide based on like, yeah, guys, next week we have this tutorial of
Got it.
like either online or we will not have tutorial. You will do project with
Got it,
like
got it.
yes.
Okay, I would suggest a couple of different ways that you could do this. Now, this is just these are suggestions, right? You can do these in different ways. The first one with regard to I want to send online next week. When we were looking at our change requests before, it's exactly a similar process. Let's pretend again, we're a staff member, put on that hat. Let's say it's this one here with Clifford, right? This lecture. Now, as a staff member again, I can hit edit. Now, this depends on the permissions you want to give your staff members. You may allow them to swap the activity type of their classes between lecture and online lecture, for example. You can restrict this, right, with permissions. So what they might do is instead of having lecture, now this might be a much shorter list for them, but I might have here online or online recorded or lots of different types. You can configure whatever you want here. Let's say it's online now, right? I still have a room on this. So what we can then do is if you let them do this, no worries, that's done. The schedulers don't even need to know yet about this, but you can use your reservation list here to search for any classes that are online and have rooms on them. And in that case, just remove the rooms and free those up. Alternatively, you might, and this is probably to me, this is a better way of doing it. You might not directly let them do this by itself. You might have here lecture, right? They can't change any of this, but they need to request a change like we did before, maybe room related, or it might be a category like, please take this online and say, just for this week, can I please do this lecture online, right? That's their job done. And again, as a scheduler, going back to our interface here, we know that if we hop in here, we can see our change requests, and we can see here from Clifford, which I just did, just for this week, can I please do this lecture online? And again, as a scheduler, we can right-click this, we can click change object and make that change. Let's remove the room and make it online and hit save, right? Oh, I've got a setting there that I need to get rid of. Bear with me a moment. I actually have an online room in my my database. So I give it the online room, right? So now it's online, and same thing. If I want to, I can send an email confirmation to everyone. Hey, this is now an online class, for example. And I can go back like we did before. Your wish is granted, Clifford. And that's done. So the whole change has been handled in less than a minute. If I don't do lots of talking, everyone can be notified through this same methodology. And if this is being published anywhere else as well, that can show up. And I'm just conscious we have 4 minutes left, and there's one thing I really want to show you. We probably won't look at exam too much today, but in Viewer, there's another functionality, especially for this, Mustafa, that I think will help. Where we were looking at our schedules, I've been looking at a staff schedule the whole way through. All right, but student schedule can be configured the same. And if we see these options, they can have similar options. So see I have here subscribe. What this lets them do is take a period of the schedule. Maybe it's the next 4 weeks, maybe it's the whole schedule. And they can bring that with this iCal into their preferred calendar. So what we find is that students obviously do access their time edit calendar, but they very often will take this subscription into their personal calendar on their phone or on their, their Google Calendar, Apple Calendar, Outlook, whatever, and staff members too. And then whenever changes are made, they can get notifications per their preferred notification preferences, right? So however they have them configured in their Google Calendar or whatever, they will get their notifications through this way. So not only do they get it in this live calendar that the changes pop up instantly, and they can have emails, they will also get it in their personal calendar, ensuring they don't miss anything. And that's good if it goes online.
That's great.
It's very
Wonderful, wonderful. Glad to hear that that works for you, mate. I will just show you something quickly then in terms of viewer, if it's okay. We've been looking at staff the whole time and just looking at an example of a schedule. But there are.
This is, I would like to highlight for you because currently we don't allow the lecturer to go to our scheduling system. What we publish is, just to make it clear for you, we have application called AppSpace. So this application is accessible for the student and the staff, and it's view only. So they will see the output of the process of this system anytime. So we have integrated something we push to storage. Once we publish to storage like S3 or online storage, then that application will fetch this data and show for the student and staff. In different words, they don't have all of these privileged requests from the interface, and all of these currently handled by email in case of they want to move online or they want to cancel or reschedule. So that's why I'm not sure if we are allowed, but normally we don't allow the lecturer even or the student to access directly to this scheduling system.
Yeah, I will say this interface generally. I don't know of too many institutions that allow a staff member, for example, if we go back to our schedule, most staff members will only be able to see the option to do a change request. They will not see any of this. They will see the information, but it's read only. Yeah. And Robert Jan, I see you shaking your head. Not too many institutions. I know of maybe one in Australia that does do the activity type and does let them change the teacher within their teaching team. So another qualified teacher in the same team, they can swap with them and don't have to go through the scheduling team. But they can't create clashes, so it doesn't matter to them. They're okay with that. But everyone else, they have to request a change through the schedulers. So just noting, they don't have the ability to change anything that your team doesn't approve if you don't want them to. I will say we do have, again, not something we'll cover today, we do have a series of booking tools as well with our reserve functionality where if you want to, you can allow staff and students to book anything. If it can be put in your time edit database, you can book it. We have a university in New Zealand that does passports. We have another one in Australia that does desks. We have universities around the world who do events and capture things like catering, for example, in here. We have other institutions with students, like you see here, different student options, who book office hours with their lecturers, where they can directly book in defined hours where lecturers are free. They can book in time with their lecturers or their tutorial coordinators and so on, or with student services or student medical, if that's on campus. So this is very, very useful and can be done through that same interface. Yeah, but it's all the same database, so it makes it quite simple. Yeah. All right. Team, I hope you have enjoyed what we showed you today. I know we had a plan for exam, but I think this was much more fun. I am more than happy to do additional demonstrations for you as well, and to follow up further. And of course, Trevor and Robert Chan will be with me there as well. Did you have any final questions for me before we do probably start to wind down today?
Probably with the next session, perhaps.
I think we should understand your system more, and because now very difficult decision for us where we should start, where we should, where we can try. start this journey, or where we can try the POC or onboarding or something, any module we can catch up. Because
Yep.
now we're just exploring. We see
Yeah,
all
there's a
these
lot
things.
more to understand and comprehend as we go
Yes.
on.
Yes, absolutely there is. What I may recommend then, if you're willing, what you were most excited by and the things that maybe most concerned you about what you saw, things that maybe anything looked a bit scary about the work that might be involved. If you can let us know what they are, and then what we can do is we can do a follow-up session. I anticipate probably data collection is a good one, and then maybe exam scheduling is a good one. And we spend some time on that, because getting data into Time Edit is much easier than things like Excel. Collecting data is much easier than in most other systems, and we can show that to you. And then it might be good for Trevor specifically and his team to talk to you about how we would then implement something like that, and what a first phase might look like, what a second phase might look like, and we can split that up over a bit of a journey, because we don't just implement a system and disappear. This is a long-term partnership that we will be offering, and part of that is making sure that we have a journey mapped out for you if you're interested in moving forward. So that would be my suggestion, if that sounds good to you.
Jordan, maybe I'll I'll jump in here, and thanks so much for doing all the demo. I think this is hopefully for more to come. I'm in alignment with your recommendations, Jordan, that we will have a follow-up session so that we can actually deep dive. As you can see, it's quite a complex system that with many capabilities. I think what we have not shown in a bit more detail is, as what Jordan mentioned, the data collection, which is actually TE preferences, how we can actually collect all the data and set that up before it's auto-scheduled. I think that step is quite important so that you can understand how we actually set the constraints and then do the autopilot, and auto-scheduling. And then, of course, maybe some more information on the exam. So I'm in alignment with that. The other thing that we could do in parallel, if this is something that APU can consider, maybe come up with your functional requirements also as well. I think that's important. Basically, your wish list of exactly what this system needs to do for you, one as mandatory and one as optional. That will help us to then make a better recommendation on the modules that you need. Again, we are also mindful, the more modules and the more things that you implement, it becomes a very complex exercise to implement.
Exactly.
Right? So we need to manage that properly also as well. Because sometimes when we talk to our clients, everyone's like, okay, we want everything, but the everything is actually very complicated to actually implement, and then to do the change management. That's something that we are also want to make sure that we manage that also as well. So it might be useful that we do two things in parallel. We can set up another more detailed demo. The second one is that if APU can provide us with some functionalities that is mandatory and maybe optional, that would be a way forward. Then we can make more accurate recommendations on that. How does that sound like to APU?
I would suggest now maybe we explore, like you mentioned, another session. We see more capability, then we start show you our use cases, because what we need to focus, like you said, very important. We like everything, but we cannot jump in everything, for example. So what we should try to find which one the highest impact, like 80% to 20%. Like we have so many things now. We are okay, the system okay for us. Like now everything done okay. Now we are running using Unitime, the solver working, we have some automation, we're linking the system, like we are not starting from zero. So our work is going on. But how we found the big impact, like that hit the buying for the management, because in the end we have to approve this process and we have to get PO, and so they need valid reason or strong reason why we need to move out, because the process will move, the changes will move, there is learning curve involved, so many changes. When you say change, I'm okay now, why you need to change? So the impact is very important for us. So what we can say, now we can, another session, we see more possibilities, like or other options like you mentioned. in the module for data management, like for exam or planning. So after we explore, then I believe the next step is to see our use case, how we have our ecosystem working. Then you will say, you guys, you have a bottleneck in this area. If you would use this module, for example, then you will save maybe 50% high impact. We need to find the bottleneck or the thing that is very critical for us.
Yeah.
But if we jump to Unitime, from Unitime to new system, we're still doing the same, like there is solver, there is automation happening. So it's, what I can see, it's helpful, but not like high impact. So I tell the management, they said, okay, you're still using Unitime and open source and free. Why you want to move to other system? You have to pay and everything done. Okay, now we are happy with it. So, I mean, this is what I can contribute to this journey. If you want to see the sun, so maybe we focus on this point.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah. I have one suggestion potentially then. Definitely use cases is fine, Mustafa. I think that's good. But maybe, do you need some assistance potentially with a business case on this? I think that might be a good way of framing some of those financial tangible benefits for APU and why it would be, advantageous to move from Unitime to Time Edit. In terms of savings, I know we discussed a couple of things throughout, some limited examples like knowing when your rooms are actually being used, change management in terms of saving time for your team, but also having much more accurate data so that you are saving much more in terms of facilities. Some of these things I think we can quantify well in a business case that might assist you.
Yes. So this is how we get the value. So we have to list. So maybe we need to find technical from me. I have, like all of us, we need to go and present for the management. Okay, guys, what's your problem and why this system comes over your problem?
Sure.
And what's the impact of like ROI? Like what's the, like for us, like what we gonna save? Because it's all about like business. So our business, what's the impact for us? Is it like saving money? So in the end, we have to look at it in money or like commercial way also, like how these things save money or give money more to them all. Because in the end, it's service. It's not like giving more money for if you like more students. It's like service. So how this service you enhancing give impact to the business.
Sure.
So this is how we look at it in different way. This is how the management look at it. I believe you understand my point.
Yes, definitely. And I think there are many areas in which you can quantify business impact, and some things we haven't even discussed today. So what we might do then is Trevor and I, alongside Robert Jan, who unfortunately had to leave, we can gather some of that information and share that with you as ways that you could potentially put this forward with the management and have a really strong impact there. So that can be part, maybe by our next meeting, we can have that.
Sorry, I may interrupt you. I just want to mention, is there any possible way we check the demo of the unit ourselves, or it should just come from your side? Because I check your website right now, and then I mean it says book a demo, I think, which is this session.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Technically, is there any possible way we check the samples or anything?
No, so it'll be a guided demonstration. I think Trevor, it would have to be something Trevor and I would discuss, but at the very most in terms of interaction, we would potentially have you sit down with a member of the team, or members of the team, and walk through a guided demonstration where you and maybe a series of your users can access the system. We would gather some use cases and requirements beforehand, and you could experience doing that for yourself, but not an unguided demonstration, no. It is a very complex system. And as I said, the data model is completely bespoke. We cannot, if we were to give you an empty system to play in, there is no data. And if there is data in it, it doesn't look like your data. It looks like someone else's data. So it's important that we have a process where we've prepared a demonstration environment for you, and that at least some member of our team is able to guide you while you experiment.
Yeah, so I think what we call it is actually workshops. We call it
Yeah.
workshops, not so much a demo. A workshop is where we actually set up the system with some of the user scenarios that you have given us. And then we actually guide you. When you use the system, we open up the system for you. You actually use it, but it's a guided workshop. I think that's how we do that. Because
Yes,
as
that's what we
Jordan
called it.
mentioned, yeah.
Yeah,
Because
and we have
if
done
you go
that.
into the system and you don't know what to do, it would just be a mess, you know. So we have to actually set it up so that you actually can go in. It's like a sandbox we set up, and then you go in, and then you can actually then test and play around with it.
And we make sure that we're available for you. If that's something we do agree on, we make sure that we're available live so we can help you in there if you have questions, because the last thing that anyone wants is that you're excited about a system and then we give you the keys and we're not there and you have questions and you can't get answers and then you have a poor experience. We don't want that, and neither do you. So we will be available if that's something we agree on, so that you can experiment in that system.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Wonderful.
All right.
Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Okay, then.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Guys, since we have agreed that we'll maybe have a follow-up session on the remaining parts, Jordan, what's your schedule like for the next couple of weeks that maybe we can
I will
sound out?
definitely have to come back to you on that.
Okay, so let's check on that, and then we'll get back to APU on that.
Yeah,
All right.
we will be in touch as soon as we can.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you very much. Wonderful
We'll
questions,
send the
team.
video link also as well. We'll send the video link to all of you so you can review some of the demos that we've just done today also as well.
Thank you.
Right.
Wonderful.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Take care.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks. Bye, team.